situation of the modern day allows for the improper use of public funds and the inefficient use of our natural resources. Without the implementation of a communistic system of economic relations, we will be incapable of properly using the resources we have. Because of competition between private enterprises, we end up using double to triple the amount of land for one purpose that we would if we were to implement a public system. For instance, in food distribution, we could have 3 burger joints, a McDonald's, a Wendy's, and a Carl's Jr., all right next to each other. They're here because they're competing for business. If there were only one of them, just as many people would be fed, but the other 2 could be used for other kinds of activities, such as housing, or as a library, or as anything, other than a burger joint being wasted. But this will not happen using private enterprise. We must communize these lands, otherwise they will be misused by the private entities. In this situation, we are tripling the value of our land that otherwise in a private enterprise would be 33% of its entire effective use. Further, the economic statuses that come from inheritance damage the inherent values of people. Many geniuses, because their fathers were poor, never will go to Yale. Many dumbasses who are rich are going to go to Yale, and because of that, take up room for the middle class, people who are geniuses but were booted out because some rich guy is going there instead, who really doesn't deserve to go to there. Communism allocates the intelligent where they need to go. Communism allows for opportunity where opportunity is best, while the private enterprise system of inheritance that we have in place today allows for none of this. The private enterprise and capitalism squanders the human resources, natural resources, and land resources of our day, and with the implementation of communism, we will reach a greater economic status in the next century. Counters to my plan. I'd say the first counter that comes up when anybody talks about a communistic plan is that somebody would make the claim people only work for their own interest. They'll make the claim humans are naturally greedy. The human nature argument is the biggest argument that's ever come up in this kind of debate style. Well, this kind of debate topic of whether the free market or the public market is more effective for humanity. I will attack in many ways this idea, starting with human nature. It pisses me off that people use human nature so much, who are obviously not anthropologists, obviously aren't psychologists, and obviously haven't even thought about this for very long. Everybody just hears humans are greedy, and they accept it without thinking. They can offer me a couple of examples. They'll say, if you put candy in front of a baby, the baby will eat it. Okay, that's solid evidence. But none of them sit down and think. I'll give you an example of why humans aren't greedy. Scientists who pick up a job as a taxi driver so they can continue doing the work they love. Doing twice the amount of labor with the only benefit of being able to work more. People who own a farm and pick up a job in the city as a factory worker so they can keep their farm and allow their child the honor of working on a farm. People are not greedy. People might in this society act greedy, but that is not the inherent human nature, that is the nature of our society. Because of the cultural goals we've set up for ourselves, we act greedy, but that is not nature. I am not debating whether or not people have become greedy. I am just saying that the idea of calling that human nature is inherently wrong. Human nature can be observed in primal settings when you look at how hunter-gatherers always banded in tribes. You can look at and talk about how people in the very beginning were loyal to kings and gods, and even without militaries, before states were formed with military powers, such as, God, I'm forgetting the name of the first civilization, but they were a completely non-militaristic state. The people were in that were under that government for 500 years, not because of fear or self-benefit, but because they wanted to. Because they believed in the gods and the kings that they worshipped at the time. People are not inherently greedy. People are inherently selfless, altruistic. Our society just negates these benefits. And so, the way I counter this is that, by nature we are selfless, and communism brings out the nature of humanity. In that way, capitalism is not going to succeed because will never succeed because humans inherently aren't going to only benefit themselves as capitalism would love them to do. That being the biggest argument against communism, I'll move on to other points. Someone might attack plan. They might say that, okay, maybe they'll take my first point and say, maybe communism is a good idea. Maybe it would work. But it's not going to politically succeed because of impossibilist beliefs. And it's not going to, well, maybe you can succeed in a war. Maybe you can revolt and implement it. But how many lives is this worth? And that is an interesting question. A lot of the rednecks who bring this up think that the Revolutionary War was worth it, even though it did not help in establishing a more free country or a better country. But they think that the hundreds upon thousands of lives of tax collectors who they beat up and killed, and enlisted soldiers who they beat up and killed, and their own people who they beat up and killed, were worth it. I clearly can state just on duplicity here, I clearly can state the positive impact of something that's greater than wars that you have supported. And so by that logic, these people, these rednecks, agree with me that this war is worth it. But to someone who's not biased like that, to not speak to a general American insulting me like I often assume, I would say that the way we do this is, the way I'll prove that this is a good thing to do is that if I can increase production, there will be more food. If there's more food and it's being shared with everybody, less people will starve. If there's more medicine and everybody gets medicine, less people will die from medical problems. And so, how many lives is this war worth? It is worth as many lives as the medicine and food production will save. And because the medicine and food production will save lives every year, forever, it is impossible for you to argue that the number of deaths that happen in the war are worth more than the impact of the new society. So you have infinity versus, at most, 100,000. At most. I think the root of the universal hate for communism lies in a victory. In that, during a war you make propaganda. After the war, you make a bunch more propaganda to make your people believe that winning the war was the right thing to do. You make propaganda to make your enemy's people believe it was okay that they were defeated. There's only ever been one revolution for communism. The October Revolution was the only actual revolution that happened, and it wasn't a good one. The October Revolution in Russia was good until the day that Vladimir Lenin shut down voting for the rest of Russia. That only Moscow voted in the first election of the Soviet Union, and arguably no election ever happened again. Soviet Union was no more free than the Tsar system before. Soviet Russia saw incredibly wealthy generals ruling a country instead of incredibly wealthy businessmen. It wasn't a great change at all. And every other communist revolution was a product of this, was Soviet Russians inspiring other people. And so, when people saw this, even without propaganda, if they saw Soviet Russia, they would hate them. I hate Soviet Russia. But then, when you get a bunch of American businessmen terrified that a bunch of Russian aristocrats are going to take their wealth, they start turning out a lot of pamphlets. It just happened to be that American businessmen were richer than Russian aristocrats. And so, there were more pamphlets made against Soviet Russia, there were more guns hired to stop Soviet Russia, and more sanctions imposed against Soviet Russia. And when the Soviet Russian system failed, the world saw it as the death of communism. The world saw it as freedom from an oppressive economic system rather than freedom from an oppressive government. Because of this, the worldview of communism was tainted. Because people say, communism ruined these people's lives. No, Soviet Russia ruined these people's lives. People say that every communist country that's ever happened has failed. There's only ever been one communist country. The rest of them were communist puppet states of Soviet Russia. The Northern Vietnam wasn't a country. Northern Vietnam was just southern Russia.
What about China?
China never was truly communist. They embraced a market socialist ideology, which arguably is communist, but market socialism still allows for private enterprise, and China never completely abolished private enterprise. Though they did formally illegalize private enterprise on many occasions, it never truly stopped. And it was only brief periods of time that it was actually legal, and in the majority of communist China, there have been private enterprise. In fact, today, 60% of the Chinese market is private, as in businesses like McDonald's, and 40% of it is public. One can argue that they're a very great socialist system, but that's beside the point. They aren't communists. And originally, Mao Zedong was a Soviet Russian. I'm not saying that he was Russian at his heritage, but I'm saying that he was a Leninist. He believed in the Soviet Russia, and when he came to power, he quickly made ties politically with Soviet Russia. They were never communist and they were Soviet, so there's two reasons why they're not a good example. I'm just going to analyze two different worlds that are already set up. A communist theoretical world and the current capitalist world. In the communist world, we have equal rights and equal opportunity for every member of society. In the capitalist world, we have 1% of people who have every opportunity and 99% of people who don't have the opportunities that the rest of the people have. It's not free. It is clearly an immoral society. So, to recap, in the communist world, we have a morally right society. In the capitalist world, we have an oppressive, morally wrong society, just by the way that the wealth is separated. In the communist society, we have incredible productivity that doesn't just benefit a single businessman, but incredible productivity that benefits every single person. When a loaf of bread is made, it's given to the hungriest man. Now, if a loaf of bread is made in the capitalist world, that loaf of bread is given to the richest man, to the fullest man, to the man who needs the least. People starve and die in a capitalist world, but in a communist world, people don't starve if we are physically able to feed them. People don't starve if they go to the ballots and vote that they want to eat. In a capitalist world, you can't do that. In a capitalist world, you vote Democrat or Republican, whether you want taxes to be higher or lower, but the government can never truly feed you. The government can never truly protect you. In a capitalist world, people lack the power to protect themselves. That is the key difference between communism and capitalism. Vladimir Lenin had a belief called vanguardism. He believed that for a revolution to happen, a small segment of the population needs to lead the rest. His belief in vanguardism stated that there was a revolutionary elite, people who were better revolutionists than the rest, who were better people, blah 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 blah. This will be a popular revolution. This won't be the October Revolution with a couple of rioters and then an elite force of Vladimir Lenin's best friends marching around. This is going to be an army of the people fueled by a bunch of provinces that have been formally collectivized into a nation. This army is not going to operate under whatever ideal I take up. It's going to operate under the commands that the new country gives me. I will be a commander, I won't be a leader. I will be a general, I won't be the president. I won't make the economic decisions, I won't make any decision that the people of the new country that is established the day the first battle happens don't let me do.